Ymedia.
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 Stay tuned with Ymedia.
Ymedia is a media company. With 360-degree approach.
Hello and welcome to Ymedia Newsroom. I'm Ramona Singh, and it's good to be here with you. We've talked a lot about Trump, and when it comes to the media, well, now there is more. We have some more details about the media industry as well as the defamation lawsuits that are involving President Trump, his businesses, as well as his administration. Essentially, they've increased sharply over the past 2 years. So in the time that a little before his second term and throughout his first term. So now analysis has identified about 61 cases since 2015, and that includes about 25 during the 2025 and the first 8 months of 2026. Now, these disputes include lawsuits brought by President Trump, as well as challenges filed by media organizations alleging government retaliations or unconstitutional regulatory pressures. And if you recall, in the first term of President Trump, he's the one who coined the term fake news. And since then, well, he's had a contentious relationship with the news media, but really, he also is aware that the news media really made his brand and essentially took him above the polls and gave him the coverage that he needed in his first term, and then in his second term, he used online media. He sat on a lot of podcasts and was able to get the coverage that he needed. So now, yeah, it's quite significant that there's about 61 cases since 2015. And in these cases, that represent about 25 cases in less than 2 years. And this, we talked about the ABC one, backed by Disney. So that has just been part of what's been happening with President Trump and when it comes to the media industry and what's taking place. So it's quite significant when you have that many lawsuits and cases going back and forth when it comes to the Trump businesses and President Trump. Now, Meta, which is the parent company of Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp, is facing a theoretical $1.4 trillion liability. So that's very significant. Meta has begun defending itself against a lawsuit brought by 29 US states, alleging that Facebook and Instagram were deliberately designed to addict and harm young users while violating young youth privacy laws. Now, this theoretical maximum penalty could reach $1.4 trillion American, although a lawyer representing California said more likely claim would be approximately $193 billion. Still a staggering figure, but nowhere near the $1.4 trillion. Now, the plaintiff in this case is 29 US states, and maximum privacy penalty is about $20,000 per violation. And the states argue each affected user could constitute a separate violation. So therefore, that's how they got to the staggering amount of the $1.4 trillion. And that's why it's a theoretical amount. But based on what a California lawyer is saying is that it should approximately be what would be probably a round number that is a credible amount would be $193 billion. And the challenges that are included in this lawsuit are infinite scrolling. So having youth, in terms of the accusation that it was made to be addictive, is because of this scrolling, this endless scrolling that people do when they get on social media and losing track of time, right? So you get onto the platform and then just this endless scrolling is part of the addictive nature of what's next, what am I going to see next? What am I viewing next, right? And then there's the algorithm content recommendations. So essentially, the platform knowing what your likes and dislikes are, what are your trigger points, essentially understanding everything about your gender demographic and qualities and what you like and dislike, and then having an algorithm that is able to feed you the content and recommendations to keep you longer on the platform. And essentially, yes, we know that it's free to be on Instagram and on Facebook, but the whole point is the longer they are able to keep users on their platform, then the longer they have active users online that they can now go to advertisers and to be able to advertise to you, right? So, there's that saying of like, if it's free and you don't have to pay for it, then you are the product, right? So if it's free for us to, open up a Facebook or an Instagram account and to be able to use Instagram or Facebook in this case, then, what's the product, right? Because it's free. So what is this multi-billion-dollar company actually selling? Well, the answer is it's you, right? It's you and I. And so that's why algorithm's important. And when it comes to engagement notifications that are designed as an element to keep users online, right? Because they're the product, right? Being online is the product. And when you're online, then you could be marketed to, and therefore those are the ad dollars that make these companies so incredibly profitable. So you have Meta that's arguing that the platform and the algorithm design receives the First Amendment protection. And a previous California jury found that Meta and Google liable for contributing to young adults' mental health injuries, right? So, I mean, for the people who grew up at a time before social media, and really there was just some television channels that had, programming for youth, and the rest of the time was, you go outside and play, or you play at home, and you do your homework. There wasn't like this endless, there wasn't like screens. Everybody didn't have iPhones or like mobile phones and tablets and laptops and multiple screens in the house, and just being addicted to the screen. Before, yeah, there was actually video games, and that was that was considered quite addictive for people who did play video games, actually. But other than that, there was a time where children grew up without these things, and the exposure you have, right? So when you don't have access to the World Wide Web, and content from every content maker around the world, then there's a lot of things you're not aware of as a young person. But if you're a young person without life experiences and coping skills and the know-hows of things, and then you get on into the World Wide Web and you get to be on social media and you get exposed to everything that's available, then that is what they're saying contributed to young people's mental health injuries, right? About how one should look like, what is cool, what is uncool. Brands constantly advertising to young people about, what they should buy, what they should look like, and the next thing to purchase and the next thing to purchase. And really, the reason you want to purchase something is because you feel inadequate, you feel less than. And when you feel less than, then you feel like this product will make me feel better, or will make me look better or be better, right? And so the whole the war on the mind is essentially making us believe that, we don't have certain things and therefore we must buy this product, or we must procure this service because they'll make us smarter, faster, better looking, whatever the case is, right? So that's part of it. So now the states are saying that this litigation, they're comparing the litigation against Meta to tobacco companies. So back in the day, if you recall, there was lawsuits against the tobacco companies because they said, it's addictive and people are addicted to tobacco, smoking cigarettes. So now they're saying that this is comparable. They're saying social media, the algorithms, how they were triggered to be addictive is comparable to the likes of the tobacco industry, and essentially saying that it's designed and marketed as an addictive product, and it's free in this case, right? At least tobacco, cigarettes you have to pay for. But when it comes to social media, it's free and you can just get an account. And if you have access to internet, then you have access to it, and because you're the product. and you and I are the product. So now this ruling against Meta could essentially influence future cases that would involve TikTok, incredibly addictive, YouTube, right? And TikTok really, when it really became popular in North America, was because of the scrolling, was because of the short videos, and because of TikTok becoming so popular overnight. And this was during like the pandemic. Then you had Facebook essentially launch, their reels, and YouTube release their shorts. And so, and of course, Snapchat is part of that as well, and other platforms that are used heavily by minors and that are obviously influenced by not just the content on there, but really having their face in their phone and not away from their phone and in the world, right? So this $1.4 trillion figure is theoretical. It is the statutory maximum when you count the violations and per incident. So it'll be very interesting to see what will actually follow from this, and what the amount will be and where this case actually goes. But I do see that Mark Zuckerberg is in quite a hot seat and in trouble. And on that news, well, OpenAI, this brand new company that's been around for just a few years in terms of what we know of it, right, with its launch of ChatGPT, really launching this AI craze. Well, now they've introduced a version of ChatGPT designed specifically for teenagers. So if they're learning from Meta, or maybe they haven't learned yet, but here is what they're announcing. They're announcing that they're promising stronger parental controls and restrictions around sensitive topics such as self-harm and violence. Now, the launch comes as AI companies face increased security and scrutiny, and litigation concerns affecting controversial systems on children and vulnerable users, conversational systems, right? So we know that there have been some cases where some people have gone onto AI chats and have asked questions, and the way the chat bot responds, for people who are more vulnerable or young, and impressionable, it's had severe repercussions. Some people with some health advice they got on these chatbots, and others would be, children that would be exposed. So now the product is intended for teenage users, this new ChatGPT for teenagers. It does include stronger parental controls, according to OpenAI, and additional safeguards that are addressing self-harm, suicide-related material, violence, and other age-sensitive interactions that should not be released to children to have these conversations in chatbots. And OpenAI is facing lawsuits currently alleging inadequate child safety protections. And of course, we just talked about Meta and other technology companies that face similar claims. So this is where it's at now. The AI companion and chatbots, have now become very highly personalized. If you've noticed, if you use it yourself, now they know so many data points about you, and they're able to keep track of previous conversations to have that continuity. If you recall, ChatGPT within its first year or second year, it really just gave you an answer and then that was it. There was no memory. Now it's like developing a personality, and it's getting to know your personality. And so critics are arguing that young users may develop unhealthy dependencies or receive inappropriate responses during moments of distress. So, for example, if a young person is very upset about a certain situation, and instead of talking to their parents or someone who's got a little bit more experience, perhaps an elder sibling or a cousin, or even a friend their own age, if they just go straight to a chatbot, because a chatbot you can go to any time of the day, and it's not a human being that's going to judge you, or you're going to feel embarrassed about talking about whatever it is that you want to talk about while you're in distress. Then if you're a younger person, then, and if there's no safeguards on that, then yeah, you're in a situation where the chatbot could say really anything to you, and you're already upset, and you already haven't dealt with this situation before, and you don't have enough life experience and enough, and you're in a situation where you're too much into the emotion, then yeah, without the safeguards, there could be inappropriate dependencies, and feeling like this chatbot is now my new friend, and now I'm going to tell it everything, and I'm going to rely on it, and it's going to replace human beings, right? And there's that's the reason they're saying that they could have this dependency that would be really unhealthy in developing that type of relationship with AI chatbots. And so it's what's interesting is Business Insider, they tested ChatGPT's new teen focused experience by having a reporter pose as a 15-year-old student and request assistance with homework. Now, the feature is intended to include stronger safeguards, but essentially what took place is that, on the issue of the effectiveness will also depend on whether it teaches, like whether it's concepts or supports problem solving rather than just simply completing the assignment. That's another concern that teachers have is they don't want students to feed their homework to the AI chatbot, get the answer and submit it. So now this test that involved the reporter who is posing to be this 15-year-old teenager, essentially it examined ChatGPT's handling of the homework requests that this this reporter who's pretending to be a teenager requested. And the teen safeguards were there to essentially discourage direct academic cheating, right? So here's the answer, and then submit that. So it was quite interesting because it's a time where schools are struggling with distinguishing what is legitimate AI assistance learning, and what is really like straight up cheating and not doing your homework and submitting, an AI answer to your homework. So that was quite critical to be able to test that and to see what is AI going to spit back. So now there's a lot of that, right? So there's a lot of conversation around is if AI has more of like a conscience and has those criterias and to have those safeguards, then what would be the difference? And some adults felt that if AI says no, I don't think this is a good idea for you, then what they're finding is that an adult, not sure about teenagers, but adult will abandon that AI platform and go to another one that isn't going to talk to you like it's a parent. So that was the other interesting point to see, will that still be effective when it comes to teenagers? So, it's an interesting time to be in this world and all the different changes that are taking place and really like take a chance and think about what's really happening. Now, Toronto Tempo, their minority owner, Sukhwinder Singh Cassidy, says that the diversity of the WNBA franchise ownership group has been the most meaningful part of joining the organization. Now, the group includes prominent figures from sports, entertainment, business, and existing Canadian professional franchises. Now, the members identified in this ownership group include Sukhwinder Singh Cassidy, as well as Serena and Venus Williams, as well as Lily Singh and Messiah Ujri, as well as Kyle Lowry and his family, and Montreal Canadian ownership representatives when it comes to also Ottawa Senator ownership, as well as Larry Tenenbaum. So now Cassidy, in this interview that you see the picture of, previously ran StubHub, and essentially saying that it strengthened her connection to professional sports and live events. And so this is quite significant because this Toronto Tempo is Canada's first WNBA franchise. Its ownership group is positioned to connect the team with basketball, technology, entertainment, as well as corporate community. So the ownership group gives Tempo credibility and obviously a promotional reach before the team is established on the court, and to be able to have the branding. And so the long-term tests are going to be whether the star power, such as the Williams sisters, also translate into a sustainable attendance as well as sponsorship when it comes to investments in women's basketball. But it's of quite a note that, there are these things taking place, these organizations, and really planning for the future of women's basketball. And we know the midterms are around the corner, so a lot of things happened on primary Tuesdays, and one being that the National Republican Senatorial Committee is now privately warning major AI companies that growing opposition to data centers could cost Republicans a critical US Senate seats in Ohio and ultimately threaten AI infrastructure projects across the country. Yes, we're seeing more people saying that they do not want AI data centers in their towns. First of all, they're concerned about the safety, all the electricity usage, the water usage. They're not sure what the environmental impact's going to be, and they just don't want it. And so this is now the Republicans are understanding that, hey, this is going to be an issue. If we're going to have candidates that are backing AI companies and AI businesses, then they might not get the vote. So now more than 4,000 data centers are operating in the United States. Another 3,000 plus are proposed under development. And internal polling has reportedly found data centers almost as unpopular as spent nuclear waste. So can you imagine that data centers are as unpopular as nuclear waste? Now, when it comes to Brown, well, they have spent millions on advertising, calling Husted the face of data centers in Ohio. And a recent Fox News poll showed that Brown leading Husted by 8 points. And so that, of course, affects Ymedia, OpenAI, Meta, Vantage, and QTS that have announced developed major projects in Ohio. And so Ohio voters are saying, yeah, we don't want you. We don't want you here. We know that you're promising us jobs. We know you're promising us, a lot of things, but we do not want this. So this is a time where it's actually taking impact on the voter base and which way they're leaning towards when it comes to these primaries. And of course, when it comes to what could be in the primaries and the midterm elections at the end of the year. But definitely there's growing opposition to data centers that is becoming one of the biggest threats to America's AI expansion. If you recall, it was President Trump saying, in his second term saying, AI is going to lead the way. And AI companies are coming up, and even ones that started last week are having massive valuations. So now this concern is that if people who live in communities resist and cause political blocks to develop, well, they're going to restrict computing capacity, and essentially it's going to determine an enormous amount of investments and market valuation when it comes to AI growth. And AI growth is going to be based on data centers. So if there's going to be political backlash when it comes to AI data centers, then that's going to be very significant. And even in races in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and of course in Ohio. So this is something that we're watching in terms of what this means. And even with Canada, there hasn't been many announcements of data centers in comparison to the United States, but it seems to be something that citizens are worried about and what it means for the environment. So when you have Goldman Sachs that have essentially estimated US AI investments will reach approximately $600 billion by 2026, that equals roughly to 2% of US GDP and 10% of business fixed investments. So when you have six major hyperscalers reportedly holding almost $1.5 trillion in purchase commitments and $1.5 trillion in lease obligations, and then you have the reality that 52% of Americans say they're more concerned than excited about AI, then that is very significant because that number of the 52% is up from 37% back in 2021 when AI was just an idea and not so much of a reality. And then you also have among that adults younger than the age of 30, about 55% are very concerned about jobs, about what AI means for society, and then this whole thing about AI data centers that backs it up. And only 27% of voters would support data centers in their community, and lower than that for any other project that tests, including nuclear power plants. So this is a time where we're seeing massive investments go in, like $20 billion on Amazon AI investment, or Meta's announcement of the $1 billion community fund. But regardless, it's looking like when there's going to be pushback on a community level, then it might affect the projections of this AI revolution in the United States. That's all the time we have for Ymedia Newsroom. I'm Ramona Singh. Until tomorrow, take care and be well.